Hi, everyone. Welcome to part one of our Being a Courageous Dad series. This is going to focus on self-regulation strategies and what it means to be emotionally engaged, but ultimately emotionally courageous, because we all know that showing our emotions can sometimes be a big ask. But as fathers, as people raising young children, we need to step up. And so in this video, we're going to talk about emotional intelligence, and how that leads to emotional courage. And so over the course of this video, I'm going to talk about what I mean by emotionally courageous, how to identify those emotional triggers that can get us in a bind and react rather than respond to our children's needs, and then ultimately what it means to put it into practice. And by that, I mean, let's create some strategies to help you be a responsive father who's emotionally courageous rather than reacting to a tantrum with a tantrum, so to speak. So my name is Brian Anderson. I am the co-founder of Fathering Together, and I'm excited to be in conversation with you through this video. And there will be parts throughout the video where we can pause and allow you to do some workshops and reflections instead of just hearing my voice the whole time. So let's get started. Before I jump into the steps to being emotionally courageous, let's just start with the baseline definition of emotional intelligence. And this comes from a psychologist by the name of Dr. Daniel Goleman. He took a lot of the research when emotional intelligence was coming out in kind of modern day practices in the 60s, 70s, 80s, but in the 90s, it really disseminated all that information into these 5 aspects. Self-awareness, are you aware of the emotions? Can you name the emotions you're going through? Self-regulation, strategies to mitigate those negative emotions that might be impacting your ability to create connection. Motivation, how you are turning that intrinsic drive to be a better person, to be better connected, to do whatever you need to do. What's that motivation? Where's it coming from internally? How do you build that in yourself? And then the last 2, empathy and social skills. So in empathy, are you able to identify emotions in others? Can you relate to what they're going through by placing yourself in their shoes, so to speak? And then the social skills. How are you communicating? How are you navigating the spaces that we need to navigate in social settings to build those emotional connections? And in this case, as we talk about fatherhood and our children, how are you using your social skills to role model good behavior and instill that sense of emotional intelligence in your children, so to speak? So I want to just give that baseline before we dive into the rest of this presentation. So being emotionally courageous, not even just being a dad who's emotionally courageous, but being emotionally courageous means putting yourself out there, naming the emotions you have, being expressive and connecting with your kids. If you're anything like me, I'm sure many nights you end your day like the dad in the top part of this slide, exhausted, feeling a bit drained, but you still have a wide awake kid in your crib who's wanting to be more involved in your day, wanting that last ounce of your energy through hugs, through nighttime readings, you name it. But we only have so much energy. We only have so many emotions we can tap into. And if we don't have emotional skills to regulate ourselves and pace ourselves through the marathon that is our day, we're never going to reach the bottom image of having those emotional connections and playtimes with our kids. My hope is by the end of this video and in subsequent videos is to have us all be less like the dad on the top and more like the dad on the bottom. We all can do that. It just takes a little bit of time and a little bit of practice. So let's get into it. I want to focus on 3 steps of emotional intelligence and 3 aspects of emotional intelligence, rather, and the 3 that are most important for being an emotionally courageous dad. For me, that is step 1 is being emotionally aware. Many of us are raised that we can be mad and we can be glad, but there's very few other emotions that young boys are allowed to participate in. We can't show vulnerability. We can be tough, but we shouldn't be too tough. We can't be depressed. Can't be jealous. We can laugh. We might be able to cry a little bit, but only at a sports event or something. And that stunts our growth emotionally. And so let's tap into that for ourselves. Let's tap into the ability to be emotional, to name those emotions, and be there for our children. Step 2 is the self-regulation piece that we're going to focus mostly on today. How are we regulating our emotions? When we're super pumped and excited, awesome. How do you tone it down if your kids need you to tone it down? If you're triggered and you're angry because they're having a tantrum or they messed up all of the dishes when they were setting up the table with their daily chore, how do you calm yourself down? How do you not react to their tantrum or their meltdown with your own? And finally, practicing that empathy component, which we talked about a moment ago. How are we seeing ourselves in their shoes? How are we recognizing that our kids might have a lot going on in their life and they might need a little bit of our patience rather than a stern lecture? So again, we're going to dive into all this, but primarily focus on step 2 today. All right, briefly, step 1, being emotionally aware. As I mentioned in the previous slide, many of us as young men are not taught to have a full array of emotions. We might show some emotions, but cultural contexts tell us to not cry, to tighten up, to be tough, to not show our vulnerable side. But as we raise our children and we want them to have that full array of emotion, we need to be willing to go there ourselves. And we can't go there if we can't name it. And so Dr. Goleman talks a lot about self-awareness in the emotional sense of our ability to understand ourselves and our emotions, but also how do we perform those? How do they affect our performance and how do we perform them? Before we can regulate our emotions, we need to be able to be aware of those emotions. Many young men, as we are all growing up, are taught to only demonstrate laughter and anger. We can be happy about things, we can be mad about things, but we can't be vulnerable. We can't show jealousy, we can't show our tears. We have to be tough, we gotta man up, right? And if we can't name the emotions, then we're not gonna be successful at regulating them. And Dr. Goleman talks about being emotionally aware as understanding ourselves and what the emotions are that we hold internally and how those impact our performance. Just as critically as fathers, it's also to be aware of the children around us that we're raising, being aware of the emotions that they're going through. Because if we're able to know our own emotions and how those are impacting us in the evening hours when we're making dinner or playing with our kids before bedtime, it's that much more critical that we can talk about them with our kids and lead to self-regulation practices that we can share with our kids as well. So before we get into self-regulation, here's a quick checklist for you all to reflect on, to think through. Feel free to pause your screen and read through these at your own pace. Happy to give you that space because there's a lot here, right? And they break into 3 spaces. Knowing yourself. Are you, as I mentioned, clearly understanding who you are and the emotions that are in you? What are the triggers and what are the stressors that play into that emotional skill set that you have? The other one is naming those emotions in others. Are you aware? Can you identify the emotions in your children, in your partners, in your neighbors? Can you figure out a way to react in a healthy, responsive way rather than reacting in a negative way? And then again, finally, communication. How are you communicating your emotions? How are you picking up on nonverbal and verbal cues so that you can be in touch with your child, especially in those early months when they can't talk to us yet? They have to rely on, is this a hungry cry? Or is this I'm tired cry? Is this I need mommy cry? Is this I need dad? Like there's so many ways that our kids give us cues early on in the way that they communicate. And they aren't even using English language yet. So take a moment to read through these. Check in with yourself. Are you able to name your emotions, your children's emotions, etc.? Do you have skills and strategies to communicate those with your children? Step 2 is self-regulate. How are you regulating the emotions you're going through? How are you finding ways to pause those negative impulses and the disruptive impulses that lead to reactions that are poor and unmanageable, that may lead to your own tantrum in the midst of your child having a tantrum? This is what we're talking about in self-regulation. This is what we're going to focus on in a minute, and what are the strategies we can have. Because if we can't self-regulate, if we're not able to calm ourselves and approach a situation with an even keel, neutral emotional territory, then our children are going to be that much more disruptive. They're going to feed off that energy. And ultimately, they're going to grow up not learning some basic self-regulation skills for themselves, and will have to learn it later. Not that it won't be too late, but the more that we can provide them strategies to regulate themselves, to calm themselves, the better. And it starts with what we do for ourselves. So let's get into it. Before we talk about strategies, I just want to take a moment to talk about the brain science. Our brains are amazing, complex machines that do a lot for our bodies, right? Everything from emotions to breathing, you name it, blood circulation, it's all up there in the brain telling us how to regulate our body on so many different levels. But the interesting thing is our frontal lobe, The front of our brain is where our emotions and the higher functions take place. And science has figured this out. Research has shown that that frontal lobe area of our brain is the last to develop. And most of the final years of development happen in the late teens into the early 20s. So when most of us are in college, when we're getting our first job, well after high school. And if we think about it, all of those emotions then are at the last stop of the information coming up from our spine, from our bodies. Where it hits our bodies first is in the reptilian part of our brain, as scientists may call it, or the cerebellum. This is the base of our brain, where the instincts are held, fight or flight, or freeze in some situations. And as that impulses come in, as the information comes in, it's telling us what to do before we get to the emotional part of our brain, the frontal lobe. And the trick that we need to do is figure out how do we prevent our instincts from kicking in, and so that we are able to respond in a developmentally appropriate way. Now, to be fair, it's good that we have our instincts, right? If we see our kid trip and start to fall down the stairs, or we see them reaching for that hot stove item, our brain kicks in immediately and we go into action. We jump for the kid to save them. It's important. Instincts are extremely important. But where we don't want our instincts kicking in is when we get home from a long day at work. We might be frustrated from a fight with our boss, but we get home, we open the door, and our kid has taken a toilet roll and thrown it around our house, right? They're 4, they thought it was hilarious. They've just TP'd the inside of your home. The last thing you wanted to do when you came home is to pick up toilet paper. But now you're going to have to. And now dinner's going to get delayed, and then bath time's going to get delayed, and then bedtime gets all disrupted. You could go down that negative path and escalate in a very dark way. Or you could work with yourself, take a deep breath, and pause the reaction to get the information to our emotional center and respond. And if any of you are fans of Happy Gilmore, you may recall in that movie with Adam Sandler, his coach is telling him, find your happy place. If you find your happy place, you negate the negative impulses and you're able to focus and be a better golfer, or in this case, a better dad. Because we aren't going to scream at our kids. We're not going to put them on the defensive for just being kids. We're going to instead respond in a way that is going to help deepen our relationship and provide an emotional strategy for them to reflect on where they went wrong as well. So now that we know about how the brain is coding all this information, it's very easy, as you can see, to react to a situation instead of respond. And so what I want you to do is pause the video and take a few minutes, and on one side of your paper, write down all the positive ways you've responded to your child in any kind of a situation. Could be a positive situation, could be a negative. Could be that your kid actually did toilet paper your house today. But what were the positive ways that you approached that situation? Then on the other side, write down some negative ways that you've done. What are some things that you've reacted to instead of positively engaged with your child? Okay, we're back. Hopefully you have solid answers in both columns, because we all have our good and bad days. And hopefully they align to some of these that I've collected from other conversations I've had with dads. The trick here is that our reaction time is quick, right? It's instinct, it goes quickly. We have about 6 seconds to override the instinct and to bypass the reaction to get to a healthy response. And for many of us, that's counting to 10. It's taking a deep breath. Those are very simple, quick responses. But for me, what I do is in that moment, I think of a dream vacation or a beach that I used to sit on. Or my favorite spot is outside of Anchorage on the Chugach mountain range, where I would hike to every so often with some friends. And we would just sit and look out over the Pacific Ocean and see Cook Inlet in all its glory and look out over the city, all the things that just make life wonderful. And I picture that in my mind before I respond, because it triggers my brain to release happy thoughts, happy memories, rather than dark, angry memories or a dark, angry space. So if I engage with my kid when I'm in an angry space, I'm not going to be able to developmentally respond to them. So take this list, compare it to yours. If you have new stuff, please contact us. We'd love to update this and incorporate your responses to see how we can better impact those who are taking this course later, or put it in the forums for dads to be able to learn together with you on how to respond rather than react. The other strategy is ultimately step 3. and that is practicing empathy. And by empathy, I mean putting yourself in your child's shoes. Imagine what they were going through. Imagine what they are thinking and feeling before you react. Many of us were children, right? I should say all of us are children at some point in our lives. And I'm sure all of us have memories of being scolded, being put in timeout, being yelled at, you name it. And I have many memories of my parents looking down on me and being angry and scolding me and pointing their finger in my face from above. And that power dynamic has stuck with me. And I also remember that it didn't work well on me. I rebelled even further. So it didn't work on me. Why would I replicate that with my own kids? Why would you? Because chances are, I imagine you're in the same boat. But what I also have vivid memories is my parents getting on my level, talking to me, talking like I'm a human being, even in some of my earlier memories when I was like 4 or 5, when I was really a little rebellious kid. And when they would talk to me and get on my level, be eye to eye like I am with you in this video, I have so much better memories of that childhood interaction. And I've found in my daughters, when I get on that level, instead of just shouting over my shoulder, stop that, or time out, get to your room, when I have that ability to engage with them, we have much more positive outcomes. So again, pause the video, but I want you to reflect on what ways do you practice empathy in your family? Beyond getting on their level, what are the ways that you do that? And I'll come back in a moment. Okay, we're back. There's 5 things I want to get across in this part. First, to be good at empathy is to be good with your curiosity. How are you asking questions of yourself that get at why kids are doing things the way they do these days? How do they come to those conclusions? How are you asking questions of yourself, but also of your partner and children? Asking them about their day, engaging with them on their level in terms of how was school? How was your gym class? Or how was art? Did you make a new friend? Asking those questions shows that you care about what their day looked like. And it's going to hopefully be reciprocated as they get older and they start to think in other centered ways like you're demonstrating here. Again, paying attention to those nonverbals. When they're super young and can't speak at all, that's critical. As they get older, is your kid walking home slouched? Are they looking sad? Are they not as communicative and they normally are? A lot of these signs could be signs of being bullying, which is a serious matter that we can cover in another video. But a lot of these are also just signs of they had a bad day or they're feeling frustrated with their homework assignment. The more you can empathize and connect with them by picking up on the cues that they're giving non-verbally before they even open their mouth, shows to them that you care and that you see them and recognize them for who they are and what they're going through. And again, being on their level is so critical. It cuts the power dynamic. It gets them to feel like they have agency in solving solutions and coming up with answers with you rather than pleasing you or just telling you what you want to hear. So in that way, it's critical to step up and get to their level. But it also means playing with them, right? Like if they love building with Lego bricks, if they love playing video games, maybe they have a dollhouse, how are you engaging with those activities and building those connections in the things that they love to do? It can be challenging, especially if it's a toy you don't like playing with, or it's a song that's really obnoxious that gets stuck in your head for the rest of the day. But believe me, putting in those steps early on is going to have dividends later in life. Finally, listening to others and observing the empathetic actions that they have in others is critical. By listening, we shut up and let them run the conversation. And we can pick up on all those tasty little morsels of information that we can use later. If they're talking about a friend, remember that name. Use it again later. If they make an act of kindness towards their sibling or to their neighbor, or if they're showing and demonstrating in their stories that they're caring about somebody else, positively reinforcing those behaviors is critical so that they know that they're doing empathy. And then they can remember that and start to store that and grow in their abilities and skills later in life too. The biggest thing I want to get across to all of us, though, is that we have more options than fight or flight. We are more than our instincts. By focusing on self-regulating ourselves, by taking a deep breath, by checking out when we need to and putting a quiet timeout corner for ourselves in our homes, we can demonstrate that we have control of ourselves and role model that to our kids. And more critically, if we are able to empathize and build that emotional connection early on with them, we can ensure that they will have those skills forming. So as they become adults, they'll have that ability to be emotionally connected and empathetic to their friends as well. So to close out our time today, number one, make sure that you are emotionally aware. Check in with yourself, name those emotions, get comfortable recognizing how you feel with those emotions. Step two, self-regulate. Make sure that you're not over-enthusiastic if your kid doesn't want you to be, but also don't come in with a tantrum to meet their tantrum. It just escalates and ends terribly for both of you. And finally, practice that empathy. Get comfortable stepping into your child's shoes, your partner's shoes, to recognize how their day went. And most importantly, repeat, repeat, repeat. There's not one checklist that will be done and you're good for the rest of your life. Every time your kid enters a new developmental stage, you're gonna have to reconnect, rethink your strategies. And same goes for you. As you get older, as your body shifts, as your emotions change, you should always be checking in so that you can be emotionally connected to yourself, so you can be better emotionally connected with your kids. As always, thank you for being a part of our community at Fathering Together. I hope you got something from this video. If you have insights or questions, please contact me, Chris, or John. We'd be delighted to create more content that will fit your needs and the relationship you have with your children. Thanks.